Exactly. So I think the problem is multifold then. Then you have to learn at scale and then the inferences that you're going to draw. And then, for example, like you mentioned, that intent understanding, then taking the feedback, or maybe a person is watching cricket related videos and suddenly you can't
Right.
really show other person other type of videos, right? So all of these things are happening in real time. I think
Right.
which puts a load on the system and the kind of infrastructure developments that we do,
Right.
and we kind
Right.
of trace it backward. So, what are the difficulties around that? How do you manage? For example, if you build a system, everything is happening, right? So, how do you manage the system? Like, what are the key points a user should be aware of?
That's a very broad, very
I'm
high importance question, which has like a lot of very broad implications for how we design it. So I think like this is talking about like personalization at scale, right? That which is
Hmm.
that am I collecting again, right? Starting point. Do I even have the data? If not, then
Hmm.
am I even logging the correct data? That means like if I'm on the ShareChat homepage and people are scrolling past videos, then am I literally logging how much the pixel density, the real state of pixels of that video which was in front of the user screen for X amount of time, right? So if that's
Hmm.
if an it's like this, right? I mean, if you skip past a lot of videos on the homepage of Netflix or Spotify or ShareChat, either any of these apps, was it a negative signal? Was that a positive signal? Or was that even like, did the user even get
Noise.
time to consider it? So it's
And
like,
how do you chaff away the signal from the noise? Sorry to
yeah,
interrupt
so
you.
this is where, right? I mean, like, I think like some of these apps do this, right? The moment, like, it's like if a playlist or a video is only like visible, 5% of the pixels of that video are visible on your real estate, then there is no way the user could have made a estimate that this is not what I want to see, right? And then skip past it, right? So
Hmm.
you have to differentiate between like, is it an intentional like scrolling past, which is a negative -1, or is it like the user just scrolled past and then they couldn't even see like few 4 5 videos, right? They're just kind of going down to the bottom, right? So
Okay.
there I wouldn't penalize some of those like videos because they're not negative. The user didn't get the time to consume it. And you can
Hmm.
literally go back that what's the human perception rate and how many milliseconds of something you have to see to kind of even make a judgment about certain content and then making an intentional choice of like not consuming it, right? So bringing it back to the point I was trying to say, that when you want to do this at scale, you have to start with like the right logging.
Hmm.
That means logging the pixels which are available, which are shown to the user, and across time, right? I mean, when I was interning at Bing, I saw amazing JavaScript monitoring of the entire like user interaction traces. I could literally replay. You type in a query, I could see the mouse, I could see in the query getting typed, and then like the entire cursor movement across X, Y, T, like X,
Okay.
Y on the screen, and then T on the time axis. So you could literally start seeing the mouse going, and the user would do this, right? I mean, on search, you see some of these snippets that there is a
Hmm.
result, and there's like 2 3 lines of text below that link. Now you
Yeah.
could literally see some people are literally like hovering over the text and then reading it, because some people have the habit of like moving the mouse and then
Oh,
kind of
wow.
following through the text, right?
So you,
So
you could see that user interaction.
you could literally,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So I even have a paper on that, like Sigaya 2017, wherein we were like, hey, can we look at these temporal sequences of user cursor movements and
Hmm.
then kind of extract satisfaction, not satisfaction on from it. So that's the depth at which like companies 6 years ago were kind of operating to understand satisfaction. Because if you type in a query like Wimbledon 2023 or like Australia Open 2023, I mean, I'm not going to click. I mean, just
Hmm.
because the result is already in there, that means like, yeah, I consumed the result and I didn't have to click, and and it was a good query, right? So abandonment was good. It was a good abandonment. So
Hmm.
I mean, I was talking about abandonment 10 minutes ago, right? That hey, if you abandon
Yeah.
the cricket tab and then go somewhere else, maybe that's unhappiness. But then here, that was bad abandonment. This is good abandonment, because literally I wanted the outcome of like who won the Australian Open. I typed in the query without even clicking. You gave me the result. I was happy. So that's a good abandonment, right? So this is what the again, right? Just an example of like, hey, understanding user interaction at scale means that
Yeah.
like you have to log all of these data. Now on mobile it's very different, right? You're swiping, you're zooming in, zooming out, scrolling past, long press, all of these are the interaction signals which you start logging. So
Yeah.
developing that system at scale means start with a very good logging in place, and you have to do a lot of monitoring, right? Because if you imagine like all this data across 100 million users getting logged, there's a lot of like, I mean, a lot of errors creep in. And
Hmm.
then you start developing these fancy interpretation models of implicit signals that gives you a label. Then you start training an ML model on top of that label. Then you start deploying it. So your whole ecosystem is built on shady data if you don't do the monitoring well. And then you imagine, oh
Yeah.
shit, we've done a lot of investments on AI in the last 2 years, and none of this is working. Why? Because your core data sets are like incorrect, right? And they're not vetted properly. And that's
Yeah.
why even in my team at ShareChat, right, and Spotify as well, we literally do this every so often, that we literally video record our interactions, and then we
Mhm.
go back and look at our own historical logs, and then we correct check for accuracy, that is this actually what happened, and even the timestamps and the video play time, are all of these instrumentations correct or not. So I
Mhm.
think people often ignore that. Again, somebody coming in from academia, they're like, hey, I'm going to try the fancy SML model, get it deployed. But then, like, hey, in the real world, to make it work, you have to go and do a lot of hard work on just the instrumentation, data correctness, logging, all of that, right? Otherwise, you're developing a model on a label. It takes a load of work to get to that label. And if that is
Yeah.
incorrect, then like no amount of sophisticated ML is going to give us good results.
Yeah. And I think somewhere when you were mentioning about platform as one of the factors, so what were the other factors that you wanted to bring in?
Oh, everything, right? I mean, like if you look at Uber Eats or Swiggy, Zomato, wherever, which part of the world you are, there is like the restaurants,
Okay.
and the delivery partners, right? And
Mhm.
as again, I'm not saying there is, but then if I'm Uber Eats, I may have a deal with like Burger King, and then I
Mhm.
might kind of start showing those restaurants slightly higher up than some others. Why? Because there's a there's an incentive for me to do that, because I have a handshake with them, and any order made from them gives me like 5 more cents on the dollar, and that's a lot more monetarily beneficial for me.
Okay.
But also, this is where, like, I mentioned this a few times, not today, but previously, that most of these systems have an economic incentive and economic impact the same day, right?
Yeah.
A restaurant doesn't getting an order today means that those people are earning less money today. So
Mhm.
you start seeing that the decisions, like the ML engineer making that decision of showing one restaurant in the recommendations higher or lower, has immediately, by tonight, the economic impact on that restaurant provider's earnings, right? Same on
Mhm.
delivery partners, right? I mean, if I'm a delivery partner on Uber or Zomato, whatever, and I don't get any order, then I don't make any money today.
Mhm.
So this is where, the feedback loop is very, very quick here. Like literally, your model makes a decision today, and then tonight somebody is having X amount of more money versus not.
Yes.
So, this is not just Uber Eats and Deliveroo's and all, right? It's like if you look at Airbnb, my house doesn't get any view. Going back 10 years ago, search engine optimization was exactly that. When Google
Yes.
introduced 10 years ago that, hey, if your homepage is not mobile friendly, I'm gonna de-rank you. I'm gonna kind of penalize you in the ranking, right? Suddenly, a
Mhm.
lot of the people who were relying on the advertisements on their web page, they started seeing huge drops in their business. Why? Because their mobile page wasn't web friendly or mobile
Mhm.
friendly. And then Google, as a ranking parameter, added that mobile friendliness. And then that ranker was kind of penalizing the pages which are not mobile friendly. And then suddenly, like, people started like getting screwed because of one parameter change in one of the rankers, right? So this
Yeah.
is where like everything is like all of these stakeholders go in, right? Even on Netflix, right? I mean, Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, they would all have like some original content versus
Yeah.
some content wherein they will pay Disney for like showing a Disney movie. uh
Uh,
so even like, all of these platforms have like exclusive deals with creators as well, right? YouTube will have
Yeah.
some creators, Apple would have some creators, Spotify would have some creators, and those
Mhm.
creators are exclusively signing that, hey, I'm gonna only show my content on this platform, and not on the others. So there's a lot of like exclusive deals going on. I mean, movies getting launched only on Amazon Prime, only on Netflix, and not on like actual.
Yeah.
So that means like, if I'm paying $100 million to a movie to be only exclusive to my platform, right? Then I have to start showing it more on the homepage, because I've,
Mhm.
I've literally made a huge investment. And then, like, of course, your algorithms are going to be biased. On the homepage, I'm going to start seeing that movie a lot more often than any other movie.
Mhm.
So yeah, it's
Okay.
everywhere. I
Yeah.
I think like multi-stakeholder platforms, everybody, most of the companies I look at are from this multi-stakeholder lens. And that's why like this multi-objective modeling is the piece of work which I've been like very, very interested in over the last 5 years. And I think like it's literally everywhere.
Yeah, and I can totally sense that, based on the kind of examples that you've given. Now, one thing that I want to, share with you, Rishabh, is that I recall from one of my previous projects, we literally needed to call some of the industry experts in terms of how they are doing as in best practices in the industry to manage
Right.
such large scale systems, right? And which I find is a very intriguing and interesting concept related to having guidelines, frameworks. You're mentioning
Right.
about real time systems that need to scale based on the user demand and needs, right? So would you like to share some of the best practices? How do you handle agile systems and workflows, especially ML systems, which are very hard
Right.
to put into agile frameworks?
Right. Yeah, I think I don't think I have a solution for that yet. And there are a few things which I've tried which have worked and not worked. So if you've talked about this with previous guests, I would love to go back and revisit their answers and maybe learn a few things. Uh so here I think like, agility in an ML system, ML world is like fairly non-trivial, right? Because it's not like you do this, you get the wins, right? There's
Hmm.
like so many things could go wrong, and you have to have like a portfolio of efforts, maybe, of like trying a few simple things, trying a few other things, and then advancing that portfolio where versus indexing only on one thing and hoping it works. So this
Hmm.
is what like people often do, right? I'll give you an example. When I joined ShareChat last year, we were working on this ad load balancing problem. The problem there is like how many ads to show on a feed.
Hmm.
And this is again like every company almost faces it if it's ad driven. That like if you're on a feed on Facebook or whatever, you how many ads do I show and where do I show them? So do I show like two ads at rank 2 and 7? Is that like everybody gets two ads at like 2 or 7, or is it personalized? Maybe you get shown three ads, I get shown one ad. Maybe the positions for you are different than the positions for me. So that's the ad load balancing problem. And
Hmm.
what I'm going to do is like in the next 5 minutes, try to use this as a case study. So kind of answer your question on iterative agile ML system development, right? Because I think this is one of the cases which I learned a lot, and then we incrementally built something which is really nice, which is in production at ShareChat right now. So what we
Sure.
did was we started with ad load balancing system and said that, hey, let's start with a very simple model, which is fixed slots, fixed number of ads to everybody, right? That's the default what any company would do, like
Hmm.
3,7, 2,9, or whatever, right? 2, 3 ads, whatever you decide. And then we realized that, hey, maybe that's suboptimal and we should start personalizing. Why am I showing two ads to everybody? Some users who are about to churn or about to kind of abandon the app, then maybe I can reduce. I can show only one ad. Maybe some users are very happy. They kind of they click on a lot of ads. Maybe I can show them three ads, right? So then you start kind of walking the first steps towards personalization. Then what do you personalize? Do you personalize the number of recommendations or the slots? So then we said, okay, let's personalize the number of ads
Hmm.
and then have fixed slots. That's again like one step further. Then we started saying that, hey, it's not a prediction task, because if I were to go from this heuristic of show fixed ads or to fix on fixed slots, then what is an ML model I could design? Should I just predict how many ads we show? So maybe I can make a prediction that, hey, let me show one ad to user one, three ads to user two. But then what do I do with it? Because the moment you tell me that show three ads, the question is where? 137, 139, 237, all of that, right? So then that means I don't have an end-to-end solution there. So then we're like, hey, maybe it's not a prediction task. And also, right, I mean, you may end up showing two ads, but then you might have been able to show three ads, but you didn't try enough, right? So
Yep.
this is where, I mean, it's very similar. Like, I mean, if Google Pay is giving you a reward that, hey, you make a purchase, we'll give you like 5% cash back,
Hmm.
right? Or and then they're like, but then the question is like, can they have given you 3% cash back and you would have still made the purchase,
Hmm.
or can they have given you 1% cash back, and or maybe they didn't even need to give that cash back and you would have made a purchase, right? So
Hmm.
how many ads to show, how much cash back to give, how much of a I mean, Uber Eats keeps great, I love it. They keep giving me like 25% discounts for the next 5 offers. Please, if somebody
Yeah.
from Uber is listening, Rishabh is my email. Please keep on giving me some of those discounts. But then, do they have to give 25%? I'm happy with that
Yeah.
15% as well, right? So
Yeah.
again, this is where it's not a prediction task, wherein like you
Uh-huh.
say that, hey, 21% is the number. It's more like, hey, let's try a bit and try to do some reward maximization. That
Hmm.
this is where like, even on the ad load balancing problem, right? What we wanted to do was balance between revenue and retention. I show more ads, we make more money, but user retention goes down. I show
Hmm.
less ads, user retention goes up, but then I make less money. And that's the
Okay.
trade-off. And that
Yeah.
trade-off is at the aggregate level.
Hmm.
And then imagine like across different users, across different times, we showing different ads. That's the system we want to get to. Here we are, two ads on 2,7 to everybody. Now this is the walk we have to walk, right? And
Hmm.
at the start of the project, we knew this is where we have to get to.
Hmm.
And do we start bombarding the solution with just that final problem, or do we incrementally build our way? And that's
Hmm.
the link between the agile system question and this case study. So we started developing some features that, hey, maybe I can personalize based on users probability of churning in the next few days. Maybe let's start looking at the feed. What are the feed characteristics? Are they happy with the recent interactions? If they're happy, then maybe I can afford them to show one more ad because they've been happy. Or if they're already annoyed, then maybe I don't want to annoy them further. So then you start creating some of these features more. No ML
Hmm.
model, but then start just heuristically devising some features, making some heuristic function. But incrementally, what that happens is all of these heuristics you try, like just with an SD in the team, with the product manager, they're trying a bunch of heuristics. They start giving you some of these features for your ML model later on as well. So
Hmm.
the effort is not a waste, right? The
Okay.
amount of exploration you're doing, you're learning a lot more about the problem itself, right? Which is
Mhm.
great, because as an ML engineer, you have to understand the problem. So this is where we started doing some heuristics that maybe if a user is in a longer session, maybe I can show maybe a third ad, because they've watched like 25 videos in like 15 minutes. So then maybe they're happy with us. So along the length of the session as well, you can start varying some of these ads, number of ads,
Mhm.
and these placement, right? So all of these insights you get by just trying some functions, trying some heuristics, and then incrementally building your pipelines. Then you
Yeah.
start introducing the ML model that, hey, there is a function which is working really great. I've beaten my original baseline of fixed number of ads, but then now have a function of 5 parameters, which is a manual function. The data pipelines are built, and now I start introducing the ML model. This is where we realize that, hey, it's not an ML model. We can maybe treat it as a bandit problem. So
Mhm.
contextual bandit is where the bandit is taking a decision of how many ads and where to show them, and then observing a reward. The
Mhm.
reward is a combination of revenue and retention,
Okay.
because there's a trade-off, right? This is a two objective multi-objective problem essentially.
Mhm.
So this is where if you're we were able to define a reward function which is balancing these two aspects, and then
Mhm.
the bandit model is literally optimizing for that reward itself. Again, we're writing a paper on this. Hopefully
Okay.
someday you'll kind of get to see that somewhere, if not in our archive. But then we walked incrementally towards the contextual bandit model in production,
Mhm.
and then we started with a very simple function. We started adding more parameters, starting developing the data pipelines, starting to kind of develop a function which is not just one parameter, 4 parameters, 5 parameters, 10 parameters. After 5 parameters, we couldn't put a human function on it. Then we
Mhm.
started introducing the ML, and then slowly, steadily, we started adding components. Had we gone with a bandit approach on day zero, we don't know any
Mhm.
of the features. None of the engineers or we have any idea of what works, what doesn't work. Are the features correct? Are the decisions, are the hypotheses correct? So I think this is a way in which you can make some bets which
Mhm.
incrementally prove out, and then you kind of end up in a much, much sophisticated solution rather than a very, very simple heuristic. And then
Yeah.
this is where, right, we started with a very simple heuristic, ended up with a bandits model in production.
And Rishabh, to be very frank, first I'd like to thank you for giving a case study. I adore case studies and examples, and I have curated not many questions. It's time for follow-up.
Sure. Yeah.
So I think I have a lot. I think we can talk for another 1 hour on that, but I'll try to constrain them and
Sure.
just
Yeah.
go straight to the point. You somewhere mentioned that whether we start gauging around whether the user is happy or getting annoyed, and you really
Right.
can't bombard them with whatever new recommendations you are giving because there's a concept of low blast radius. You really don't want to go all out. You want to
Right.
minimize the damaging impact, right? So to gauge whether a person is happy or not, or the user is happy or not, how long do you do that? Like, how should I know that my test, like, it's more like an A/B testing, right? So how do you know
Right.
when it's time to withdraw?
Yeah, I think that's a very hard question, and I think like a lot of PhDs will be
I know.
spending like getting that answers. I think like this is like problem dependent as well, right? I mean, the example of Facebook I was giving, right? That
Mhm.
search example.
Yeah.
So that is more like a habit inculcation. You immediately see some metrics go down, but then if a user still kind of starts searching and then start seeing that, hey, I can start searching more, then maybe over the next 4 to 6 weeks you start seeing the number of the search volume increasing. So I think
Okay.
on that problem, you start seeing the effects maybe like few weeks down the line, right? Same on notification. Notifications is like a month long. I mean, there's a recent we've been doing a lot of work on Marge and ShareChat on
Mhm.
notifications, and this is where we know that like, hey, short-term notifications wins are like absolutely not good to look at, because notifications is definitely a property which is a lot more long-term. But then like some of these, so these are good examples of long-term solutions, right?
Mhm.
Long-term monitoring of impact. Uh, but then some of these are like very, very short-term. Like if I start showing more tail non-popular artists, non-popular creators to you,
Mhm.
and you may like it, you may not like it, suddenly your session length increases, decreases. And then suddenly I have a very, very quick feedback from the same session, right? Same about
Mhm.
coherence. So coherence in a feed of sequential recommendation, that's a very immediate, like within like 20 seconds I would know whether you like it or not, right? So this is where a lot of solutions which we've kind of, even at ShareChat, we've developed and deployed are in session personalization,
Mhm.
wherein just based on the real time aspects, real time interaction, right, I can personalize a lot more and then immediately see the response and then do a better job at recommendation. Now this is where one of the other points, right, which slightly tangential, and I'll try to wrap it under the same umbrella. In session personalization works really well when the number of items you're interacting with is a lot more, which is short video apps. Like if you spend half an hour on
Yeah.
Netflix, right, you're going to watch like one video maybe.
Yeah.
Right, if you spend like half an hour on Spotify, you're going to look at maybe half a podcast or like maybe like 10 music tracks. If you
Yeah.
spend like half an hour on ShareChat mods, Instagram Reels, TikTok, look at like hundreds of videos, right? So when you're interacting with 100 items, then I get a lot of like real-time feedback, and then like I can learn a lot more quicker. My as a platform, the shots as
Mhm.
successes are a lot more. I can learn very, very quickly. I can fail. The cost of failure is less because you're not going to abandon just by skipping a video. It's just very easy for you to scroll past a video, right? But then I can
Yeah.
immediately 5 videos down the line, which is literally 10 seconds. I can do a lot of like real time personalization and start showing you better content, right? So this is like we're talking about notifications being like 4 weeks. Here we're talking about within 10 seconds you're able to do it, right? So yeah, I think like this is an amazing spectrum that like some of these are like very, very short term, very real time. Some of these are long term, and we have seen a lot of like designing at scale a real time system is insanely hard, right? And
Yes.
even we at ShareChat on Mods, like we're still in our early days. We've seen a lot of like benefits come from in session personalization, but still a very, very hard problem on the scale front, on the learning front, on the evaluation front, on the model
Mhm.
designing front, all of it. So
Yeah. So I think one of the point, Rishabh, you mentioned that comparing to the different platforms, right? For example, TikTok, ShareChat, as compared to Netflix, right? Where a person when starts with some or the other video or something, right? Then they'll stick to it for some time as compared to the
right.
short video format. Now, there we were talking about somebody dropping off from the system within 2 seconds or something might be considered
Right.
as a churn or abandonment, something like
Right.
that, right? Here, because the video or the duration of the overall content is very less. So, do you keep on calibrating the threshold itself, or how do you know? Because the person is hopping, not literally hopping. Maybe the videos or the content is just moving from one to the next. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the cost of failure is what should be surface specific, right? I mean, a cost of failure on search is a bigger cost of failure. Like you type in a query, I don't provide any useful results. That's a huge cost for me. Whereas a cost of failure on one video in a sequential model is a lot less because you can just because the effort you have to get the effort user has to put in to get past it, right? It's going to be very,
Yeah.
very less anyway. Now this is where I mean, like there's a very nice paper from Jean and Fernando and a bunch of other people from Search at Spotify way back in 2018, 2019, which is like effort metrics.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of this is like depending on the user effort.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, so I think there's a nice paper at Sigayar, I think, to look at mixed methods for effort-based metrics on search in music streaming. I mean, that's not the title, that's a kind of few words for the paper. But I mean, you start realizing that hey, some of these if it takes a lot more effort for the user, then like it's a lot more hurtful for us as a platform. If it's a low
Okay.
effort thing, then maybe we can afford a lot more. So yeah, some of these real-time interactions a lot more like less effort, so maybe it's okay.
Yeah. And somewhere when you mentioned about coherence, can you just zoom in onto that also a bit? What is
So
coherence overall?
so coherence over here, I mean, it's like Spotify radio or ShareChat. Like, I mean, if you even on Instagram, right, you click on a video and then you start scrolling past. So you go to the explore tab on Instagram, you get a bunch of images and videos. Some of them are cricket, some of them are fashion, some of them are cooking or whatever, right? Whatever you might like. You start clicking on a video which is cricket or cooking. You scroll down, then suddenly next set of video, like now you're in the cooking mode, maybe you want more cooking videos or more cricket
Okay.
videos, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there, like suddenly if this is where like coherence comes in, that the user may or may not want coherence, the topic may or may not deserve coherence, right?
Okay.
And then the right decision there is a mix of all of this, because again, right, if I'm listening to let's motivational videos on YouTube shorts, for example, right, so
Hmm.
then maybe I'm in that group, right? And suddenly like I don't want like a dance video popping in front of me because hey, you're kind of picking me up, you're kind of getting my spirits high because of motivational content, and suddenly there's like a bummer video which hey, what the hell, right? This is not cool. So you start realizing that you have to start personalizing not just for the user, not just for the content type, because certain categories may like devotion, right? If somebody is
Hmm.
watching devotion content, then suddenly they don't want the next looking at gods and like devotion, suddenly the next set of videos is like a bunch of people dancing. That's not coherence. And
Okay.
so my point is that for coherence, it's dependent on the user wanting it, not wanting it, on the content category. Like some categories are really more indexing on coherence versus not. And
Hmm.
how do we understand all of this, right? For a category, I can understand across user base because
Okay.
category level characteristics are still common. On a
Hmm.
user level, I have to be very real time because
Hmm.
if a user wants coherence in this particular session or not, that is something which I can only make an inference real time. Whereas for a category, you have like 10 million, 100 million users interacting. So for a category coherence understanding, I don't have to be I can afford not to be very real time. On the
Hmm.
user part, I'd rather be a lot more real time and then adjust accordingly.
Yeah, and this coherence also changes over time for that particular user, for example. And I believe all ML models have a burn-in period where they kind of learn the change in interactions and then accordingly start moving away from the previous choices to maybe popping up with new set of choices that the user might like. So how do you manage that?
Exactly. Yeah, I think like this is a great kind of leeway for me to mention about like, hey, I mean, I would want to respect users' appetite for coherence, but also I
Yeah,
want to shape the user consumption, right? So
yeah.
I started using this phrase. We have a paper on this at Wisdom last year on like consumption shifting. That can I shift consumption to a certain topic or a certain kind of content type, right? Because I know
Mhm.
you like it, but then like, hey, if I get you interested in that other genre, I maybe earn a lot more money because of strategic value, or like there's a lot of tail creators who are really struggling to grow their audiences, and I start getting you interested in that. So again, like you might, it's like somebody I know at Spotify they used to say this, like it's like you're entering a house from a room, but then once
Mhm.
you're in the house, I can get you from one room to the other based on
Yeah.
like my nudges, right? So this is imagine, right? You're going into a recommendation platform, looking at this content, that's fine, but then from there I can lead you onto a journey, and that journey could be optimized for you long term, or it could be optimized for my strategic content as well. Because there are, let's say there are other creators who are long tail creators and they want to grow their audiences, right?
Mhm.
I might get you interested in them if I start nudging you towards them in your half an hour on my platform, right? Suddenly there's a win-win scenario that you're discovering. I mean, your appetite for discovery is also there. So I'm getting you to discover creators, but then which creators? The creators
Yeah.
who are like who I want to grow audiences for as well. So suddenly,
Okay.
as a platform, I can start mediating the user needs with the creator needs, and then play that matching role in a marketplace, right? Supply demand. That if there is demand from you and there's supply, maybe I can make the match, right? Maybe there is not demand yet. This is where
Okay.
things become meta. That you wanting it is something which is slightly easier to satisfy, right? It's hard enough, but
Hmm.
making you want it is the next level goal, that you may not realize you want this content, right? But then if I
Mhm.
can make you want that content, then suddenly I'm playing god on the platform, because then I could shape your behavior, right? I mean, on music, right? I'm pretty sure like these apps can make me like a lot of music if they start giving the classics from that music and then start appreciating it. It's like taste, right? You develop a taste.
Hmm.
You're
Yeah.
not born with a specific taste perhaps, but then like you start kind of getting a hang of it and start getting preferences towards it. All of these are like journeys which platforms can and should and maybe are curating, right? And it's just
So
that, am I mindful about this and am I intentional from a multi-objective sense? And I hope like at least on a platform which I would want to own, I'd want to govern some of these and like influence it in a way in which everybody can be beneficial. That's when the other side of the story comes in. As a platform become a lot more powerful, and then like all these trust issues start popping up as well.
yeah, I think I was about to come on to that, Risha, because somewhere you mentioned, and I think this also ties back to this multi-objective, multi-stakeholder, that is it economically benefit to the platform or maybe to the user, and maybe there is a middle ground where it's a win-win situation because you don't want user to get stuck into one thing and
Right.
eventually maybe drop because they're not exploring enough or they are not being
Right.
exposed to explore enough. And it could be there is an incentive driven motivation from the platform side as well, and that's where I've heard maybe from the ethics side that the people most often say that their choices that they take or the consumption of the social media thing, right, it gets
Right.
maneuvered by recommendations. So what is that
Right.
thin
Right.
line? Does it get breached? Where does it get breached? How does that happen?
I mean, yeah, I don't think I can answer the where it gets breached question, because I'm pretty sure like there's a lot of like legal. I mean, there's legal aspects to
Yeah.
this. There's a lot of like a lot of foundational research which has been done by people across decades on this topic, and I'm no expert on that. One thing I can mention is that like I think like as a platform designer, right? If I'm able to do my measurement and evaluation metrics right, then
Hmm.
I have the right incentive to do the
Yes.
right thing. So
Yeah.
I think this is where like the evaluation metrics piece comes in, and this is where I think there's a lot of work going on, but also a lot needed on developing the right incentives for platforms, right? I mean, people optimizing for clicks because they only value short-term metrics, right?
Yeah.
Suddenly, if somebody on the data science team in those companies are doing a good job, that hey, there's a short-term win, long-term loss, and here is how you're measuring the long-term loss, right? I mean, what is
Yeah.
even the long-term metric? I mean, if you're able to quantify some of these long-term metrics and start showing that hey, you're kind of decreasing on those values, then I think like the companies have a shot at least attempting it. So I'm not
Yes.
denying that like some of this is intentional, right? I mean, of course, some of this
Hmm.
might be intentional from companies, but then some of this might just be ignorance because you don't have the right metrics in place and you don't
Yeah.
have the right measurement in place. So looking at user behavior from a shallow lens, developing CTR level metrics might just mean that, hey, I mean, like one of the things, right, especially on media streaming platforms, is the amount of discovery people do, because Spotify and Apple Music are not just a music catalog, right? I can get all that catalog, but then the discovery I do of new artists, new creators,
Yes.
or on ShareChat and Mods, if I can discover this new genre, new set of creators who are creating these amazing videos, I might start liking them, right? So how many of these companies are developing those metrics, that hey, how much discovery is happening, what's the user's consumption diet, right? Like, if I mean, consumption diet is a very holistic word, right? I mean, in medical domain as well, right? I mean, you need certain vitamins, certain iron, certain calcium, and certain like proteins, right? And if you're in over indexing on one versus the other, like, bad things happen to your body. Now
Yeah.
this is also where, like, when I start looking at my digital consumption, then there's going to be a diet, and then what is a healthy diet for the long term? Now this is where, like, I mean, do we have those detailed metrics of looking at a long-term sustainable diet for a user on a platform, which
Yeah.
might benefit not just the user, but the creator, but the platform? I think that is a very hard problem. It's very easy for me to say it in English that, hey, go do this. But then, like, how do you solve
Yes.
this, right? I mean, I think this is where a lot of like very detailed causal analysis, a lot of like metric development work has to happen. And
Yeah.
then you have a shot at least getting the right incentives in place, and the right
Yes.
incentives would mean that, hey, I mean, you don't go into some of these like filter bubbles, which might be very, very detrimental for one of the stakeholders.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think before I go to my next question, I think I read a lot about AI ethics, and one of the problem I see is that it remains an abstract concept. People are good to talk about it because
Right.
if I think from the platform perspective, if you're showing something what a user is actually looking for, and you keep showing that, maybe that's what user wants, right? So when on one side you're doing that, on the other side person says that because you're bombarding me with the same thing, you are changing the way I think about a particular thing because it's everywhere now in my ecosystem. I am intended to look for it more and more. So you are kind of
Right.
driving me towards that. So I think it's like these are both extreme sides of the spectrum where and it becomes difficult to measure it because ethics is something which is not in numbers, like you mentioned, that if you are aware of those overall metrics, the global metrics, which is a win-win for everywhere who is the player in this ecosystem, that becomes an easier job still.
Right.
But because it's not easy to put it in a quantifiable manner, it remains a problem for the orgs who are maybe not doing it knowingly
Exactly.
also. Yeah,
Exactly. I mean, like putting it in quantified manner and then explicitly stating your trade-offs, right? I mean, this is
absolutely.
something which we've been using, like governance. What's the platform governance rules? Governance are what kind of trade-offs are allowed and what kind of trade-offs are preferred on a platform, right?
Yes.
I mean, one is like you don't even have the metrics, then you get in the metrics, then you have the metrics, then you have to set up preference order for them. And what trade-offs are you okay with making and what trade-offs are actually you're not okay with making, right? So I think
Yeah.
like like this is when like things start becoming codified, because a data engineer or an ML engineer by just one parameter change might be influencing the trade-off in a very, very different way, right?
Yeah.
Unintentionally, right? Oblivious of the harm it might cause to some downstream creators or downstream users or like somebody on the platform, right? So some
Yeah.
of these literally unintentional changes in hyperparameter setting will have a huge trade-off implication. And that's when, right? I mean, as a leadership, it's your job, part of your job, to identify some of these trade-offs and
Mhm.
then make it explicitly available internally, right? That, hey,
Yeah.
start monitoring these metrics and
Yeah.
and then start looking at these trade-offs, especially in a multi-objective world. Like if you have 5 metrics and each of your hyperparameters gives you different trade-offs, then do you go for the model 3, which is giving you 5% gain in metric 1 versus 2% gain in metric 3, or model 1, which is giving you 10% gain in metric 3, only 1% gain in metric 5, right? So
Hmm.
which of these wins should I go after? What's the trade-off? Should I increase
Yeah.
this versus decreasing the others? All of these are things which you keep on doing on a day in, day out basis, right? It's not
Yeah.
just in a multi-stakeholder platform. Every hyperparameter change, every transformation of a feature you're doing in a model is impacting these things day and night, right? I mean, it's been doing that for the last 10 years. So my point is
Yeah.
like it's already happening, just that we can be cognizant of it and start kind
Yeah.
of controlling it, right? Controlling, at least like being explicit about it. Like even the embeddings I learn, right? I mean, the embeddings, if you use word to vec or whatever, right? The
Mhm.
embeddings you're learning, you're like, hey, my system's not biased, I'm not doing anything fair unfair. But then like the training data for your embedding model is making the embeddings biased towards certain content or not, right?
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
think it's just like people shy away from the saying that, hey, I'm not doing it, it's organic. There's nothing called organic, right? You're designing your system in that way. So because
Yes.
because of the data you're selecting, because of the UI changes, because of the how you're training it, because of the labels, because of how you're using it, all of these are intentional choices which are influencing your platform. So there is, yeah, I mean, it's not that any. I keep hearing from a lot of people that, hey, it's organic, I'm not shaping it. I'm like, of course you're shaping. It's default. Your job is
Yeah.
to shape it, right? Literally, your job is to develop a model. So
Yeah.
your model is shaping it essentially. So just being mindful of some of those, and I think this is where hopefully the community over a period of time starts explicitly identifying these metrics, start being cognizant of these long-term impact, and tying in with their incentives, right? Because I might be aware of the long-term impact, but if my company is shutting down in the next 3 months, I don't care, right? Because again, right,
Yeah.
capitalistic world means that I'll have to optimize for my bottom line, revenues, all of that. So then,
Yes.
as long as the incentives are aligned, then maybe there is a hope for like improvement there.
Yeah, and I think you correctly mentioned that somewhere you have to call out the trade-offs, and I say them sometimes as quote unquote non-negotiables. You just need to call out those
Right.
non-negotiables, that maybe an example of hierarchical optimization, right? This is something that you have to make sure that doesn't get breached or something, right?
Right.
And
Right.
then later on, you can keep saying, keep calculating those design choices that you're making.
Right.
And one point that you mentioned, right? There are multiple touch points in that entire workflow, or the ecosystem or the pipelines where things can go wrong, and we are shaping them in a certain way. There is nothing organic as such, but when specifically it comes to the data on which we are training it, I read somewhere that, even if the data is biased, does it become a job of a developer or the org or the leaders who are helping the company build that product? Do you want to play around with that data? Because if you, in your intent to do that, you are kind of bringing your own bias. So how do you
Right.
agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, right? I think, like, I mean, in my worldview, as an ML engineer, it's all your job, right? I mean, people might say that, hey, it is maybe a data engineer's job or a leader's job or a data scientist's job or somebody else's job. I think like a healthy approach is like just to own accountability end to end, and assume that, hey, I mean, if I'm working on this problem, then I have to be cognizant of start to end, right? That
Yeah.
literally going back to the instrumentation, is this data even trustable, right? Or
Mhm.
is it maybe like some users are on a different internet or different mobile device, not a high-end phone, and their data is like corrupt, or like we're not even cognizant of
Yes.
like the bad, right? So just
Yeah.
there means like 3% of your population is unnecessarily suffering because of the logging policy you have in place is not favorable to low data networks, right? Or low bandwidth mobile phones. Now,
Yeah.
then like if you want me to get gains on metric, now I can look at those 3% users, and then there's an incentive for me to do that. Because if I'm starting to own the entire problem end to end, then I'll go and find out those 3% users, find out what's going on, go and talk with my client team. The client team has a bunch of Android and iOS developers, figure things out with them, and then
Mhm.
start building this, right? Now, the
Yeah.
first question you asked, like years of experience, you doing that even as an MLE1, SD1 means that you're developing that high level bird's eye view, talking with the other stakeholders, working with client. And then
Yeah.
I mean, like you can be in the company for like 5 years and still not do it, or you can be in the
Mhm.
company for like 6 months and still kind of go and do it. I mean, we have an
Yeah.
intern at ShareChat. I'm maybe I'm okay with like name calling. Arjun is one of the interns. He's an intern working on data engineering front. He's been like tagging the director of product on the experimentation side. Hey, what is going on this? Why don't we have this, right? So this is the accountability which an intern can have, directly
Yes.
reaching out to the product director, talking about some
Mhm.
of these things and like holding them accountable for doing their job essentially, right? So I think
Yeah.
like all of this means like end-to-end accountability is important. Uh, Monitoring the impact right from the start to the end. All of these kind of play a part.